With that, I'm happy to take a few questions, and I'm going to start with Beth.
Thank you, Mr. President-elect. Thank you. Wondering if you could give us some details on your proposed stimulus package, how much it's going to cost, where the money's going to come from, and when do you want to see it enacted?
I want to see it enacted right away. It is going to be of a size and scope that is necessary to get this economy back on track. I don't want to get into numbers right now. Part of the task of this economic team behind me is to help shape the details of that plan in consultation with Congress, the Federal Reserve, and businesses and thinkers across the country. But I think the most important thing to recognize is that we have a consensus, which is pretty rare, between conservative economists and liberal economists, that we need a big stimulus package that will jolt the economy back into shape and that is focused on the 2.5 million jobs that I intend to create during the first part of my administration. We have to put people back to work. Now that runs in parallel with making sure that our financial system is stable, and so we're going to have to do more than one thing at a time. But across the board, people believe that this stimulus is critical, and the first job of my economic team is to shape that economic stimulus package so that it is delivering on the 2.5 million jobs that we talked about and is also providing a down payment on the long-term strategies we need in terms of making this economy work for all Americans. That means we have to invest in clean energy. We're going to have to invest in the systems in our in health care that can reduce costs for families and for businesses. It means that we're going to have to invest in the education system to ensure that we're competitive over the 21st century. So not only do I want this stimulus package to deal with the immediate crisis, I want it also to lay the groundwork for long-term sustained economic growth. Okay, let's go with Jeff. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. President-elect, my question is about taxes. Will you let the Bush tax cuts expire at the end of 2010, or will you use legislation to repeal them?
Well, I said during the campaign that my plan represented a net tax cut, and that's important to remember. 95% of workers in this country would receive a net tax cut under my plan. Now, the reason that's important is not only is that good for families who are struggling, but it's also part and parcel of what we need when it comes to stimulus. We're going to be putting money into people's pockets so that they can spend on buying a new computer for their kids' school, so that they can make sure that they are able to deal with heat and groceries and all the other strains on family budgets. Now, what I've also said during the course of this campaign is we've got to restore some balance to our tax code. And the Bush tax cuts were disproportionately targeted towards the very wealthiest Americans. Those who are making more than $250,000 a year can afford to pay a little bit more. And it is important, if we're going to help pay for some of these expenditures that are absolutely necessary to get our economy back on track, that those who are in a position to pay a little bit more do so. Whether that's done through repeal or whether that's done because the Bush tax cuts are not renewed is something that my economic team will be providing me a recommendation on. But the basic principle is that we're going to provide tax cuts to the vast majority of Americans, the middle class that have been struggling over the last 8 years, that those who've benefited disproportionately over the last 8 years, the very wealthiest among us, will pay a little bit more in order for us to be able to invest in the economy and get it back on track. Okay? Kim Chipman, Bloomberg.
Mr. President-elect, I'd like to ask a follow-up on the size of the stimulus package. Senator Schumer said yesterday up to $700 billion was needed. Today, investor Barton Biggs said as much as $1 trillion. Could you give taxpayers a range of the figure that you're thinking of?
I'm not going to discuss numbers right now, Kim, because I think it's important for my economic team to come back with a recommendation. But what I want to emphasize is that there is a consensus among across the political spectrum that we need a stimulus, and we have to make sure that the stimulus is significant enough that it really gives a jolt to the economy, that it is putting people back to work, that it is making investments, that it is restoring some confidence in the business community that, in fact, their products and services are going to have customers. And so we are going to do what's required to jolt this this economy back into shape. Now, it's going to be costly. And one of the things that we know already is that even if we did nothing further for the remainder of this year, that we're going to see a substantial deficit next year, bigger than we've seen in a very long time. And so I think American taxpayers are understandably concerned if we already have a big deficit and now we're adding an additional stimulus, how are we going to pay for all that? The right answer is that we have to first focus on getting the economy back on track. We've got to first focus on making sure that we're creating those 2.5 million jobs. We've got to make sure that the investments are made to sustain economic growth over the long term. And then what we also have to do as part of this package, and this is going to be one of the major charges to my economic team, is that we reform how business is done in Washington and how the budgeting process works, how projects are done, so that we have a path towards a sustainable and responsible budget scenario down the line. So the way to think about it is short term, we've got to focus on boosting the economy and creating 2.5 million jobs. But part and parcel of that is a plan for a sustainable fiscal situation long term. And that's going to require some reforms in Washington. And I'm going to be discussing that more tomorrow. Okay?